All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Workforce Wednesday webinar. My name is Kirsten Bayer with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support at Illinois State University, and I will be your moderator and technical assistance for this webinar today. Today's topic is a WIOA performance session on WIOA primary indicators, employment-related measures. And so this is in our performance series that we've been conducting. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we get started today. As a reminder, all participants on this webinar are in listen-only mode and you do not have the capability to unmute yourselves. But if you have questions as the session proceeds, please feel free to post those in the chat or the Q&A. And then we have planned breaks throughout the session today to answer questions and address them. And we'll also have time at the end for a question answer time as well. And then a reminder that this session is being recorded and today's recording will be up on Illinois WorkNet and up on our website within 48 hours. And I'll put that link to the website in the chat momentarily. I'm also going to put the link to the slide deck for today in the chat momentarily when I'm done with this housekeeping items here. That way, if you want to download the slide deck for today in PDF format, you can do so and follow along with today's presentation. And then in an effort to be as accessible as possible, this session will be offering live closed captioning. So if you need this for note-taking purposes, accessibility reasons, or you just like to have them on to follow along, you can turn those on by clicking the live transcript button and enable button on your Zoom toolbar there at the bottom of your Zoom. And then at the end of today's session, you will be getting a link in the chat to a follow-up survey. And then that same follow-up survey will be sent out to you via email tomorrow. We ask that you just take 5 minutes out of your workday, either today while the session is still fresh in your mind, or either tomorrow when you get that follow-up email to give us some feedback on today's session and any other future Workforce Wednesday webinar professional development you would like to see. And then another reminder, if you do have faulty internet connection or would prefer to call in, you can do so by using the phone number and your original registration email that you received from Zoom. And I'll put that same phone number in the chat momentarily as well. And so with that, I'm going to start us off with our beginning workforce polls that we do every Workforce Wednesday webinar. And so the first one is, where's your local area? So where are you joining us from this afternoon? Putting that one up now, and we'll give everyone about a minute to go ahead and answer that. So we appreciate you answering that. And then while you're answering that, I'm going to put in the chat here. Here is our website. And if you go to that website, this is where all of our Workforce Wednesday webinars are housed. The recording will be up on this website, as well as Illinois WorkNet. And you can also access the presentation, which is up there right now on that same website. And then I'll put the direct link to the PDF in the chat here as well, so you have access to that. So I'm going to end the poll and share the results here. So it looks like most of us are joining from Northern Illinois and Chicago up north, and then spread across the state as well. I'm joining you from Central Illinois, so welcome to all my fellow Central Illinoisans. And then you can go to the next slide, please, Mark. The next poll is, which partner do you best represent? And then if you want to be more specific, what is your role in the WIOA system? So answer the poll, and then if you would like to put in the chat here, what is your role in the WIOA system specifically? So I'll give everyone a couple more seconds. I know most of you are joining us from Title I today, which is to be expected. And if you could actually put in the chat, because I apologize, we were supposed to do this poll, which is on your screen now. What is your role in the WIOA system? If you could put in the chat whether you represent local board member, chief elected official, local board staff, a one-stop operator, Title I director, Title I career planner, other WIOA partner, or other stakeholders, we would greatly appreciate that. So we have some people joining us from Title I director, systems performance manager, assistant director, career planners, Associate Center Director, Regional Manager. Thank you so much, everyone, for responding. Lots of career planners today, and directors and associate directors, assistant directors, performance managers. Thank you so much for participating in the chat. And with that, I'm going to go ahead. Please continue to still answer this poll by posting in the chat. And then I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Mark Burgess and Paula Berry, and they can introduce themselves and start the session.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Thanks, Kirsten, for getting us going with our session. Here's our team again. We really appreciate all those who've been able to join these sessions. This is our 5th in a series. We'll continue in the new year and do again appreciate all of you joining along, participating in the chat, providing some really good, thoughtful questions that we've been able to answer. We're going to continue to do that through today and again next year in the sessions we have scheduled. Our team does consist again of Patty Schnorr, who's our manager of performance and technology, oversees the development of the Illinois WorkNet system as well with our partners there at Southern Illinois University, and our IWDS system here, as well as coordinate with other systems. Paula Berry is our kind of resident expert on performance. She's been very helpful throughout all these and helpful from getting me to where I'm at today. As you know, many of you know, I've been around the program for about 16 years and have been in the performance side of it for a year and a half now. So continue to learn along with you, but hopefully we can provide you some really great information that remind you of things you've already heard and known, and sometimes hopefully makes you aware of some new things. So we'll proceed on with the presentation. Today's session, we really hope to educate you, help you learn about the employment-related measures. We've talked about measurable skill gains and credential attainment, and now we'll close with the last 3 measures, which are the employment rate second and fourth quarters after exit, and the median earnings rate. We hope to help you understand that there is a little bit of difference in those 2 employment rate second and fourth quarters for the Title I youth program. So we'll outline what those differences are. And we want to help you understand the median earnings rate, who gets counted in it, and what is it you need for documentation to track it. And especially we want to clarify what supplemental wage documentation is necessary, what information is needed to ensure we capture all those individuals that actually are employed and have their wages, so we can address our median wage indicator. We'll start again with a poll here. We have Nancy, who's a dislocated worker participant. She's participated in a registered apprenticeship program, and as you'll see here, she's receiving career services as well. So she's finished that program, and it says here exited the program June 24th of 2020, and the training she received in that apprenticeship was towards mechatronics. So she gets employed in that job finally on August 31st and remains employed today. So our question to all of you is she in the employment rate second quarter? Is she in the employment rate fourth quarter? Is she in both of those? Or is she in neither of those, based on the knowledge you have today? And we'll get you an explanation here shortly to clarify for those that may still be wondering about this outcome for Nancy. Give you a few moments to respond to the question. Like to have all of you join in if you can. If you're new to the system, take your best guess, give it a shot. We'll help you through it to understand if you have selected something other than we expect. But we all are here to learn, so feel free to respond, even if you're not certain. Give your best choice at this time. About 25% of you are completing this up to now, so give you a moment for a couple more, and then we'll go on to the actual answer to this. All right. thank you. We've got almost 20 people responding now, so you can see the responses here. We do have a few people that have indicated this is only second quarter. Most of you did select second and fourth quarter, and that actually is the correct response. She's included in the employment rate second quarter and fourth quarter because RAP, or Registered Apprenticeship Program, is considered employment. Once she entered that RAP, she would be included in both numerator and denominator. Also, the fact that she gained employment with another employer after completing the apprenticeship training doesn't really affect this measure or her status, as in both cases she's still employed in each of those quarters. So as long as she is employed, she is counted as a success regardless of the employer. She could hold any number of jobs, but as long as she was employed by one of them in one day of the second quarter and one day of the fourth quarter, she's going to become a success in this measure. Thank you again for all those that completed that. We'll move on. You've seen this slide in our previous presentations. We just want to continue to remind you that we want to do our best to capture all of our successes, but we have to keep within the guidance, the regulations that are provided to us, both at the federal level and then what we've designed and developed at the state level. So refer to these often as you're trying to make some decisions at the local level. I'll repeat kind of what I said in some of the previous sessions, that we're hoping to give you enough knowledge that you can make a majority of these decisions on your own, and you have confidence that you're making the right decision, that you don't have to feel like in any situation that you're a little bit wavering on whether somebody is in a measure, somebody's a success in that measure, that you can make that decision. You don't have to always contact us. It's not that we don't like to hear from you and we don't want to respond to you. We certainly do want to help you when necessary, but I think in a lot of these cases, you know the answer, you're just not confident in that. So through these trainings, through the information we provide in policy, and through all the federal guidance as well, we hope to build that confidence that you're making the right decisions, that you know ahead of time, you know, that you're making the correct choice in capturing performance outcomes. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Paula, who will go through the first couple measures.
Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. So yes, today, like Mark said, we're going to continue our informational webinars on performance, and we have 3 more indicators to go. And this will be it for the rest of the year. And they are our employment rate measures, and we call them wage-based or employment rate measures because they're measuring WIOA program participants' employment and wages. Next slide, please. And as always, before we get into like the technical descriptions and calculations and methodology, we just want to give you this basic resource to always go back to on a couple slides of definitions that directly tie into these measures and everything we'll be talking about. The first one, you're probably all aware of, a participant. So it's someone who's been enrolled in WIOA services. They've got their first registered services. They're considered a WIOA participant. They are in the measures. You are serving them in a WIOA program. They've been determined eligible. And then we have a separate definition for a WIOA Title I youth participant. And this is a youth participant, but they have satisfied other applicable program requirements that categorize them as a youth. And why they're pulled apart is because they're treated a little bit differently as far as the performance measures and how they impact them positively or negatively. Then program exit is a big one, and it's the date of exit from the program, and it is always the last date of their service. The date is programmed for you. We look at that, and we can't really determine the exit date until you've exited someone in the system of record, and then they go 90 days and they have not come back in for another service from you, and that is their exit date. And the importance here is because the exit date is what starts the performance reporting. It starts the clock ticking on these employment rate and wage-based type performance measures we're talking about today. The period of participation And it has to do with all of our performance measures. We did the measurable skills webinar. We know there's a lot of different things going on with that. It's not exit based, so all the definitions don't apply. But anyway, someone's period of participation is the time from when they become a participant. They've satisfied their eligibility criteria, you enroll them in your program, and then from the date of when they exit the program. That is their entire period of participation. It can span a few years, depending. Next slide, please. Okay, seems pretty straightforward. Employment is just when we will use employment about 100 times today. So we thought it was important to at least explain it a little. And it's literally when someone is working in a paid, unsubsidized job or working 15 hours or more a week in an unpaid job on a farm or a business operated by a family member or participant. That's the law. I mean, those are different definitions that are in WIOA law. So that's the general definition of employment. What we're looking at is unsubsidized employment, and this is employment in which the employer doesn't receive a subsidy to pay the person, to pay their employees. So basically, they're not getting any federal funds to offset that employment. It's not subsidized by the federal government. It's unsubsidized, so it counts for WIOA. The other type of wages and employment that does count, it's not unsubsidized, but it's supplemental wage information, and it's pretty much for those employees of businesses or employers who don't report the wages to IDES. So we're not getting that direct wage match or wage upload for them. So there's certain things that need to take place when you have a participant who is working for themselves, they're self-employed or something like that. And Michelle gave a good, really good general definition of unsubsidized. I liked, and it's because it does get confusing. Unsubsidized employment includes any employment in which a participant is hired by a private or public employer, and there is no reimbursement of any portion of the wages paid to the participant. The employer is not getting help from the government, so let's count that employment. So these are more for a reference, so we can move on to the next slide, please. And this happens to be another poll, so I'll give you a second, Kirsten. Okay, so with all of our polls, we'll just ask you to try to participate if you think you know the answer. So this is Sarah, who is a WIOA out-of-school youth participant who participating in a mentoring and internship during her participation. Those were her services. After completing her internship, the employer hired Sarah on full-time. She exited the program shortly after becoming employed and remained employed until the third week of her fourth quarter after she exited. So, given her participation, services, and employment, is Sarah included in the Title I Youth Education and Employment Rate second quarter after exit indicator? I know we haven't gone through these measures yet, but this is just kind of saying where we're at as far as understanding these. So I'll give you a couple seconds. It looks like everyone's answered. If that's not everyone, sorry, I'm just looking at the yeses. Okay, so I think we have all of our answers. So the answer is, for those of you who said yes, that is correct. She is included in the numerator and denominator of the employment rate second quarter after exit. As we move on, any WIOA participant is going to be included in the employment rate second and fourth quarter after exits. She's considered a success since we shouldn't assume she was employed in her second quarter after exit. And the example clearly stated she was employed in that third week in the fourth quarter after exit. Doesn't matter. It could be one day in that quarter. So she's considered a success for the fourth quarter after exit for youth employment rate. So she's a positive in both youth employment rate measures. Again, as we always point out, and we'll talk about, that scenario mentioned that she's just employed in the third week of her fourth quarter after exit. So for the purposes of WIOA, we don't look at 1 week, 1 day, 60 days. It's one wage or employment verification that will count them as a positive. Next slide, please. And we will be taking questions too. So now we're going to move into the technical descriptions of these measures. And for the employment rate second and fourth quarter after exit, like I mentioned in the definitions, we have adult and dislocated worker participants in WIOA, and then we have youth. And some of the differences besides eligibility are the performance measures that they're counted in, how they're counted, and how they contribute to positives and successes in the calculations and your performance outcomes. It's very different. So employment rate for second and fourth quarter after exit are just trying to measure the success of their WIOA participation. And they go through the program during their whole entire period of participation. So we want to look at them after they exit the program and determine in these measures whether or not they're employed in the second quarter after they exit, and then further the fourth quarter after they exit. Those of you around for WIOA, we used to call it like employment retention, but these are specific quarters. So since the whole point of WIOA is to prepare all the participants with the knowledge and skills, maybe training, maybe not training, to gain employment, we're just tracking their ability once we let them go out of WIOA. Some are no longer receiving any services whatsoever, and how our programs set them up to succeed in the work world. So yeah, it's not in, these are not indicated in these, or these indicators are not set up to track the level of employment or how long they're employed in each quarter. We're not even measuring employment with the same employers from the second or fourth quarter after exit. We just want to know that they were employed or not. So again, it doesn't capture retention, it's just their employment. So who is in the measure? So this is an easier calculation to determine, I think, than some of the past measures we've discussed. It's all adult and dislocated workers who exited the program during the reporting period. They're all in. The second you enroll someone, they're a participant, they're going to be in your employment rate measures. And then those who exited and have employment in the measures in question are going to be your successes. So same for youth. All youth who exit your program, who have been participating, will be counted in the measure no matter what, except for the exclusions we'll talk about. And then again, the youth who exited in any reporting period and are found to be employed, or they have this extra way they can be counted as a positive, which is an education or a training, and they are your successes. So basically, everyone who you enroll is going to count in your measures here. And unlike the credential and MSG measures that seemed a little more complicated as far as calculating denominators, these measures have nothing to do with training enrollments. If they never had any training, just a couple career services, and you enrolled them, they will be counted in these measures. So we're not just looking at people to get like an occupational skills training to put them in the measure. They're all in. And it also has nothing to do with their employment status when they come to you. If you enroll them employed, they will still be in the measure. Next slide, please. Okay, so firstly, we're going to talk about the youth measures, the youth employment rate and education or training in, okay, sorry, let's talk about the adult and dislocated worker first. It's a little simpler. So for adult and dislocated worker, we're looking at the employment rate second quarter after exit. This is a reference slide. I won't read it to you again, but the calculation is out of everyone who exited in a reporting period, they are divided by the number who are employed in their second. Well, it's the number, sorry. See, when I read it, I'm not correct. I should just talk. But it's the number of participants exited during the reporting period employed in the second quarter after exit divided by the number of participants who exited during the reporting period. So again, number of people who were employed in the second quarter after exit divided by your total denominator, every single person who participated. Then the other thing that we'll talk about more is supplemental wages are now allowed to verify employment for these measures. This isn't new anymore because WIOA isn't new, but back in WIA, supplemental employment wasn't allowed as widely to count as your positives in these measures from what I remember. But with proper documentation, supplemental wages do count. But then the only people who won't count towards your performance are those who exit during the reporting period for any of those exclusionary exit reasons, like incarcerated or deceased, or some extra reasons for youth, like foster care. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the youth employment rate or education or training count in the second quarter after exit. So this is the number of youth participants who exit during the reporting period and are employed or in education or training in the second quarter after they exit, divided by all of the youth who were exited in that same reporting period. And here the difference is Title I youth, we're not looking separately at in-school or out-of-school youth. They're all in. And that's different because I know for the MSG and credential, we talked about the in-school youth are always going to be in it, and out-of-school youth if they had training, but that's not the case here. They're all together. They're all in the measure. And since youth may be at the time of their lives when you're serving them, not so inclined or ready to always be exited and take on employment. So for that reason, DOL, with these measures, through the WIOA program, has given us a second way to get some positive performance outcomes for youth. And that's when you can track them or count them in being secondary education or training. So secondary or post-secondary education and training count exactly equal to employment for youth. So that's a big deal for this measure, and it's a big way to increase your outcomes and positives for youth in this. They have an extra in as a positive on this, in other words. So supplemental wage, again, is allowed to verify a youth employment. But then again, any youth participants who exit for any of the exclusionary reasons will not be included in this measure, no matter what. Next slide, please. Okay, and so again, I mentioned the different measures for the second and fourth quarter after exit. This is the definition of our adult and dislocated worker employment rate. Fourth quarter after exit, it's exactly the same as the second quarter. We're just looking at indication or wage upload or reporting of employment in the fourth quarter for these measures. Next slide, please. And the youth definition of their employment rate and education or training, which count in their fourth quarter after exit, exactly like the second quarter. We're just specifically looking at wages in the fourth quarter after their exit quarter. Next slide, please. Okay, so just like all of our webinars, besides the straightforward calculations for each measure, there's other things that you need to think about when you're looking at your system of record or recording any of this information, or when it comes down to looking at their actual outcomes. So what a few takeaways for the employment rate measures. So unsubsidized employment can be verified through direct UI wage record match, federal or military employment records, or supplemental wage documentation. So that's basically summing up the type of employment that we're looking for to count someone as a positive. And then again, it's always important to remember, especially as you're working and exiting someone and tracking them, because this is post-exit. So a lot of this for youth is going to be really important. You're going to have to find out about their education, secondary or post-secondary, during follow-up. Since youth have that extra way, they can meet this measure. The only way you'll ever know is to find out during follow-up. But on top of that, maybe you learn about these post-exit outcomes, and they've told you what they're doing, and they're enrolled as a full-time student and doing great. Since that's your outcome, we will never know about it unless it's documented, like an other outcome, like supplemental employment needs to be documented in whatever system of record. A lot of these wages, we get uploads from the employers reporting them to IDES. It's just that simple. Our system will report those wages whether or not the career planner even knows someone's working. I know that's not always the best way, but it is how the primary method and mechanism we use to report wages. But then when we're talking about these employment and education outcomes, there's no way we'll ever know those unless you ask the participant and it's documented. And then there's one more reason, and they're all important, but for tracking when a youth is in education, secondary or post-secondary education after they exit. And that is because, yes, it's going to get you their positive for their employment or education rate measures, especially if they're not working. That's your only way to get your positive for these outcomes. But if you remember, when you have a youth who say you exit them and they only have a high school diploma, this is like killing two birds with one stone. Documenting this outcome is also going to get you the fulfillment of their credential attainment rate positive. And I don't want to intermingle these measures. We're talking employment rates today, but as we move on, some of these outcomes count for other measures. And then again, the exclusions for the exclusionary exit reasons aren't going to be included here. Next slide, please.
Okay, thank you, Paula. We do have a couple questions in the chat, so before we move on, let's go ahead and address those. Actually, one of those I've indicated, we had Christine ask about exclusions, and I know we have a slide later on the exclusion, so I think we'll wait to address that when we get to that slide. So we'll remember your question, Christine, and come back to that at that point in time. We have a question from Paul. During the program year, they were not enrolled in training services. Would it be positive for youth if they enter into a GED or high school equivalency program in the post-second quarter? This would be counted as enrolled in education, correct? Or if they enroll in something like Penn Foster in that post-second quarter.
Okay, I'm reading. It's easier for me when I read it too. Okay, so Paul, yes, so it has nothing to do with, these measures have nothing to do with services that a youth participant received during participation. And I know where you're getting at. So if WIOA had nothing to do with them enrolling in a secondary training, could we still verify and count that post-exit to meet the criteria? And yes, they're in the measure regardless of their training status. So it would have to be documented, but yes.
Okay, next question is the IBIS information, business information, does not provide the start date and job title for employment that is being reported by employers. How would we use this as a verification to put into IWDS?
Okay, before I forget, Christine had a question about an exclusionary exit reason. I'll go back to, you
Yeah,
said
well,
you,
let's wait. Yeah,
never
we'll
mind.
wait for that one. Yeah,
I'm
that's okay.
getting behind. So, Paul, so I'm assuming that you guys are looking up IBIS to get a hold of some employment before we get the wage upload here. So for anyone you're tracking, anyone exited in unsubsidized employment, all youth will be required follow-up. So ideally, you would get that information from the exiter themselves. And the verification that we're asking for, the date of employment, it would just have to fall into the appropriate quarter. We discussed this, and it would be, you'd have to be able to verify it, but if you're not exactly sure of the date in the middle of the month, like if you didn't know if it was December 3rd or the 18th, you could use December 1st.
Okay, thanks. Another one, what document be collected from the youth to confirm education in second or fourth quarter?
Okay, so I would refer you to the data validation table, but since that doesn't bullet point everything, when you're recording this in your system of record, I would think that you would always have like something like a transcript, a note from the school. If they could give you a report card, their transcripts, any type of documentation stating they're enrolled. I am also thinking to support any type of case notes, if you could have those signed by an instructor, even if they're well documented and someone, because they're funding it themselves at this point, or because it's after exit. So I would think any of those types of documentation within reason and great support to back it up, and case notes would fulfill that documentation. And this is where sometimes I rely on the other participants who actually are working with youth and their career planners, which I don't. If you can think of anything else, sometimes I'm not familiar of all the type of documents that are given to training program participants. I mean, if they graduate in a certain quarter, they had gone to school in that month, I would assume that alone would be documentation that they were enrolled in that quarter. So if you think of anything else. Okay, Cassandra. So yes, Cassandra, yes, if you want to go ahead and, so what you're doing is using the post-exit documentation in the system of record, like in that quarter, and you're recording information about their employment there before we get the upload to try to track them. Yes, that date would be fine. Because whatever you manually record, and it's not supplemental, I know that they're probably going to be reported, you're seeing it in IBIS, so most it's probably not just supplemental, it's unsubsidized. When we get the wage upload, it will override any dollar amount. It won't remove your entry, but the UI or the IDES wage upload does override that. So that date is fine, especially if you have a case note to support it, a referral service. Yeah, so you wouldn't have that because you didn't place them, but that is fine.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I think the key of that is we do want to capture these when we know they're employed, and you want to be as accurate as possible. But when you can't have the exact date, then the first seems to be logical. If you had a better guess of when it might have occurred, then I would think you could use that, but I think we can rely on the first, because all that matters really is that they were employed by using that
Yes.
first of the month that you know they were employed. That's probably as accurate as you're going to get without any other records.
Yeah, if it falls in that quarter. Then I thought I saw.
Yeah, there's another question from Paul. Speaking to ONET codes, IWDS requires an ONET code to be placed in it to put employment. Ideally, we would try and get this from follow-up, but if the youth is unresponsive and we see wages in IBIS, how would we record an ONET code?
Okay, so you never, okay, so if you don't want to just wait on the upload, if the youth was never placed in any type of education or training during participation, I would say, and I'm not telling you to make up an ONET code for their employment, but if it's required and you go about this retroactively getting this in there for tracking, I would look into their ISS, and if they ever indicated any goal or employment goal, I would try to find an ONET associated with the occupation they stated as their goal during participation, because, or the last time they spoke. I mean, we know this happens with youth. Sometimes your hands are tied. You can't get, does that make sense?
I think this one's timely, Paul and Paula. I was on a call at POL yesterday. We get on these on a quarterly basis. They track some other measures that are not any of the 5 core performance measures. And one of them that they track is whether an occupational code was entered in a file or not. And quite a few states brought this example up that said, one state must have been a large one, maybe California, New York, even Illinois, said we have 100,000 customers. Are we expected to try and track down 33? Because I think the expectation was around 33% or 75, whatever the percentage was. It said, so are we actually expected to, continue to try and find that individual so we can put it? And in essence, yes. I mean, that's what DOL said. You've got to make every attempt you can to do it, but obviously there's limitations to the amount of time you're going to spend when you just absolutely know you've lost track of an individual. So do the best you can. But they did say they were looking at some of the questions that were presented in that session yesterday, and if we get any more additional information that can be used, and it might prompt change. That's what's good about these focus groups and these other pilot projects that they do, is they're learning from the field just like we're learning from you, and trying to clarify where there's gaps, where there's concern, where there's a need for clarification. And so if we get something from DOL indicating how to address that, we'll certainly share that with everybody. And then Kelly, one of our regional managers, has also responded to some of these questions here. Thanks for joining, Kelly. She said, in past experience as a former grantee, we would verify employment in a few ways: copy of a paycheck stub, employment verification from the employer, or utilizing the work number, which is a website. And I think that's in response to, Paula, you may be able to answer this. What if somebody finds out a past participant is employed because they see it on a social media site? Is that, is that verifiable enough?
Yeah.
Even if I mean, she indicated that, Paul, but I'm not sure that, out of state even is an issue, other than, for someone that you can't track them otherwise, even in state. But I get her point where it's a lot more difficult to track somebody once they leave the state of Illinois. So is that verifiable, and is that allowable?
Well, if they're, I don't know the depth of the social media posting. I mean, maybe it's a question for a monitor. I mean, if they literally update and they have their uniform, I mean, I don't want to say they're in a uniform or something, but honestly, if it just, I don't know how in-depth you can go into messages and things from their social media accounts. It would make sense. I don't see why they would lie about it, but I don't know if it's something we could use to verify employment for performance reporting. if they're out of state, we have the Swiss agreement. So we'll get their wages in a wage upload. You will never see that wage. But, you know, after the 45 days, we'll get, if they're employed and it's reported in Iowa, we'll get their wages through the Swiss data sharing agreement. But any other opinions about a posting about social media or about their employment on their social media accounts? I mean, if this, this is totally out there, but if I was seeing, then I saw a message from their boss saying, what an excellent job. And it was like, they're tied to an employer or a business, and they're like, you've been doing a great job, keep up the great work, good luck on your, you know, congratulations on your first week at my company. I would be inclined to add that, and then we'll have even more backup with the Swiss, but we'll never see that wage. So, I mean, Kelly, maybe is that a stretch? And maybe also this can be brought up in next year when we talk about career planning and supplemental and follow-up documentation strategies.
Yeah, I think, you know, Kelly's provided a little bit more information. Again, thanks. I think we do our best. We'll look into this and find out, you know, if there's limitations on what's allowed. If not, then we'll share both responses and let you know and get more clarification on how we would do this. But Kelly provided some good information to consider. I did have one other clarification. Again, as you've seen me do on these webinars, for all of you that maybe seem like some of my questions might be rudimentary or fairly simple. I just do this for my own clarification so I can respond appropriately. But, and I'm not going to be able to say it now. Are you still able to hear me clearly out there? I've got someone outside that's creating quite a bit of noise.
I can hear you, Mark.
Okay, I'll continue on. I just didn't know if it was a distraction. But so when we talked about earlier, I'm going to go back to slide 15, where whether the participation in WIOA funded training or not. So obviously some types of training or education that would qualify for a youth would not be in training, but we need to reemphasize that everyone is included in the denominator. Training is not even a consideration. So WIOA funding isn't a consideration, but again, trying to clarify for myself, Paul, and for everyone else, if we're using the education and training on the numerator side, that also does not need to be WIOA funded, correct?
Education or training? No, correct. Because if you think about it, we're not allowed to pay for education or training post-exit. So those, unless there might be some rule, but for youth supportive services, but I don't think Kelly can clear me up. So those extra outcomes are only allowed for youth, and we wouldn't be funding their, say, occupational skills training post-exit. So they do not have to, and they probably wouldn't absolutely not be WIOA funded. And there's really no guidance asking, okay, if they're telling you they got themselves into education or post-secondary education on their own, how are they paying for it? I mean, at that point, I've never seen where we track grants or student loans or anything like that. I think youth are allowed. Oh yeah, someone just mentioned that, like more supportive services post-exit, but I have to go back to that policy.
We'll go ahead and move on. And I actually just realized.
Kelly had a question. Did you? Yeah.
Yeah, Kelly she was just saying we need to be cognizant of verifiable information and back to, and I didn't realize when I responded to everyone that Kelly had responded directly to Paul and I. that we really need information that's verifiable. And does a social media message really, can that be verifiable? Like Paula said, she was even reluctant, even if they're in uniform, what does that mean? So I'd be cautious to do that unless we can find additional guidance from DOL that says that's okay.
And I guess
it's just something we don't want to get caught in on the back end where they're asking for documentation and we don't have it. So be mindful of that.
It was a huge stretch on my part to say if they saw a bunch of messages from their new boss saying great job on your first week. Well, maybe if the employer was that involved, that's who you could reach out to. Because sometimes I think when a youth is totally non-responsive, if you get their employer to verify, then that would solve that issue, I believe. But it couldn't just be straight from their social media communication. But at least maybe you could figure out who their employer was and contact them that way.
Thanks. We'll go ahead and move on to the we'll go on and move on to the next scenario. Here we have John, who is an in-school youth receiving WIOA services and participating in our good old summer youth employment program. After completion of that junior year, looks like 11th grade, we'll just call it his junior year of high school. He exits the youth program in August following completion of the SYP program. And in January continues his education in his senior year. Again, we'll presume that with this, just the indication of the 11th grade when we started. And then he is not employed during that quarter. John graduates high school and doesn't begin working until October of that year. So is John in the youth education employment rate? So we've updated this not to just say employment rate, but a youth education employment rate, because we can't count education. Is he included in the second quarter? And we'll have you, Kirsten, put up the poll, please, for this one. Is he a success? Is he not a success, or not included at all? So please complete the one of the three responses here. We'll give you a few seconds to do that. We hope through these scenarios we just add another element to each of these stories about our participants to get you thinking again about these measures. And always welcome your feedback and thoughts. Even when we provide a response, there's a lot more that could be considered, but we're going off what's just given in the scenario itself. Eventually, we hope in next year, as we'll talk about later, going through an entire case file and an entire scenario, not just bits and some pieces, to try and work through all the measures. So we'll continue to build these out. And then with this scenario, we've got almost 20 of you responded, and the majority is saying yes, he's in both the numerator and denominator, so he'd be a success. Quite a few of those think he's only in the denominator, so he wouldn't count in that numerator. He would not be a success, and even a couple of you don't think he's counted at all. So we'll end that. Kirsten, show him the results, and I'll move on to the explanation. And with this, he is actually included in both the numerator and denominator. Remember, the youth program in this measurement includes enrollment in education and training, not just employment. So John is a success based on his education status. Employment is not necessary to be a success. His education status and enrollment is not a factor as well. Paula mentioned that earlier. We don't look at what their status is when they come into the program, or even when they're exiting the program, because this measure counts everybody in the measure once they exit, and we're just looking forward at the second and fourth quarters. If we look at, so in this case, he would be a positive or a success for the measure of second quarter, which is what was asked. But if we, forward think and wonder what would the outcome be in the fourth quarter, John would not have been a success because October would have been a fifth quarter after exit. So if you think of your quarters when they exited, July through September is the fourth quarter. He wasn't employed until October. So had the question stated fourth quarter, not second quarter, he would have not been a success. So hopefully trying to add just a couple bits and pieces to these as we provide an answer response to the actual question, just to let you know and get you thinking again if the scenario changed just slightly, what or the question changed just slightly, what would the response be? With that, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Paula. Thank you again. I like that all of you are responding to these, and we're getting some differing views so that we can hopefully clarify for all of you what these outcomes should be, what the responses should be for the polls, and next time around you'll know that as you work with your participants, especially if you're a career planner. Paula.
Sorry, I'm muted. Okay, so moving on to the fifth WIOA primary indicator of performance, and this is included here because it's called the median earnings rate. And it's employment related because it's related to their employment status, and it's looking at wages. And the purpose of a median is to capture the middle value in a series of numbers. And that is the definition of median. How does it help measure WIOA services and how they help participants? It's for all the participants who participated in WIOA, same for adult dislocated workers and youth. So they exited, and if they were employed at any time during their second quarter after exit, all of the wages in each program are listed in order from lowest to highest. And literally the value in the middle of this list is the median earnings calculation. Like that in and of itself is the calculation on your outcome for this measure. So only those wages that were earned in the second quarter after exit are included in this list to calculate the median wage. So that being said, if someone doesn't have a wage in second quarter after exit, they're not even going to be in your list to calculate their median earnings. One thing to point out for some of us who've been around a while, this is a new concept, or it's not a new concept, it's a brand new measure for WIOA. Back in WIA, we used different earnings calculation. We did an average earnings, and it just like combined everyone in each program and then kind of divided it up and took a measure over an average over a couple quarters. So this is completely different. Way in the past, we did like a pre and post comparison. So this is just such a brand new measure. And sometimes we wonder what it may be telling us. But for now, we just have to realize that all of the programs are going to be on the hook for this median earnings rate. So next slide, please. Okay, so median earnings. Who is in the measure? Adult and dislocated workers and youth are in the measure for the same reason. And that reason is when they exit and they're found to be employed in the second quarter after exit. Then again, this is reiterating the calculation. For each separate program, we list all of their wages, literal dollar amounts, and the middle value is pulled out. That's your outcome. If there's an even number of wages, we won't have a wage right in the middle. So they take the two middle wages and they do average those. So it's not an average, it's just the average of the two wages representing the median. So as well as the employment rate, second and fourth quarter after exit measures, supplemental wages are allowed to calculate a participant's earnings. So if they're employed in the second quarter after exit, and it's just supplemental data, they're self-employed, and you have that outcome recorded like you need to get their positive for the second employment rate, second quarter after exit, that their wages, that person will go into this list and they'll count in the median earnings calculation. Next slide, please. Okay, so again, I mean, this is very repetitive, but this is a great example that Mark included here because It almost seems too simplistic that we would actually calculate a measure this way, but it's the quarterly earnings. So we're just looking at the wages in their second quarter after exits, and then the way they're listed and calculated. So say you only have 7 adults employed in their second quarter after exits in any given quarter. In the system, behind the scenes, Jeff does performance in your system of record. They are listed, and the person with the wage right in the middle, 18,500, is pulled out, and that is literally the calculation for your adults. In this example, your adult median earnings rate, it's 18,500. I mean, you see a wage that's way higher. That seems to be an outlier. And then you have the 12,500, which was considerably lower than the median. So this may be removing some of those increasingly high wages that might not be characteristic to your area. And just as an example, in an average calculation, that would skew the average. The median is just pulling out the middle of all of your people and their wages, or your exiters, I should say. Next slide, please. Okay, so there are a few additional median earnings operational parameters that will exclude someone from being counted in this measure. So anyone who has these characteristics or outcomes is going to be specifically excluded from the list of wages, meaning their wages won't count in that second quarter median list for any given program. So anyone who's exited and not employed in the second quarter after exit, they won't count in this measure. No wages, no supplemental employment, they're not going to count. And then participants, obviously, who have exited and their employment information is not available. Participants who exited from a program and have 0 income. So if you've recorded a 0, they're not, I mean, obviously it looks like they're not employed if they have 0 income and you don't have supplemental recorded there. Participants who have exited in a program are in subsidized employment, meaning employment that is being offset by the federal government. And then participants who exited for any of the reasons listed in the exclusions from performance, which we'll go over at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. Okay, so Mark, you're going to do this scenario, right?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and do it. So we have in this one, we'll talk about median earnings in this scenario where Stephanie was a dislocated worker participant for a period of looks like about 5-6 weeks, exiting the program on April 1st, at which time she began working in a hospital following completion of that OJT. So she was employed for, again, 5 to 6 weeks in an OJT or training in an OJT, exited April 1st, and we only have wages available for the next 8 months. We don't have wages for April. So from May to December, you see these wages here, 2,000 all the way up to 2,500. So she's getting some escalations in her wages over her period of first several months of employment. So for the purposes of this measure, median earnings indicator, what would be the calculation for the earnings, or is she not included in the measure at all? And if you could put the poll up there, Kirsten. So here are your choices: $4,100 in earnings, $7,000 in earnings, $7,300 in earnings because she was a success in this measure, or she was not a success. So which one of these is it? All right, we've got several here. Some of you maybe trying to do the calculation with a list of numbers in a row. It's hard to capture the right numbers. Got a wide variety, some indicating she's not in the measure. Give you a couple more seconds here, and then we'll move to the response. Keep in mind all these dates. That's where we're trying to make sure we understand the measure. It's not only the dollars, but how these dates affect whether someone is in a measure or not, and whether they're a success or not. So we'll go ahead and close that poll and show the responses. And Stephanie actually is a success with the median earnings, and the measured wage or calculated wages for her in this measure are actually $7,300. So looking again at those dates, the quarter to be considered for employment and earnings for Stephanie is that quarter capturing October, November, December, which were the second quarter after her exit, and the combination of the three wages that you saw in the previous slide. Earnings in the quarter in which she exited and the 3-month period immediately following it are not considered when calculating the wages. So we think she exited in April. That quarter ends June 30th. So the first quarter after exit is July, August, September. So the end of September. That's not what we're looking for. So the second quarter after exit would actually be October, November, and December. So that's why the total is $7,300 to capture the last three in that list of wages. Had she exited one day earlier, March 31st, which is the end of a quarter for performance purposes, then it would have gone to the 3 months prior to that, or the July to September period, at which point the calculation would have been $7,000. So very important to know those dates, because in this case, one day makes a huge difference on what you should be capturing. Always have that in your mind. What is a quarter? That's that's why we included that in our definitions today, is the period of participation. You need to understand that so you can start calculating when the second and fourth quarter is going to capture performance outcomes. So thank you for completing that poll. We'll move on. Turn it back over to Paula for talking about supplemental wages.
Hello. Yes. So, okay, supplemental wage information. And while this is not a performance measure, we just covered the last one with the median. Supplemental wage information is crucial for understanding and documenting, because, as we explained, DOL is counting it for positive performance outcomes for all of your programs. So this is a good slide to reference when you're just not sure. So when verifiable wage records are unavailable to determine employment status, supplemental wage data may be collected and verified for such purposes. And it's not saying that you're not getting a verified wage record. It's just not one, for example, that someone's employer reports wages to IDES. So we're going to get those. It's things such as like self-employment and others. So it's applied to all four core measures: employment rate second and fourth quarter after exit, median earnings, and the special rule for the credential attainment rate measure. Use of supplemental wage information needs to be consistent across all the performance measures. So, for example, if a participant is included in the second rate in the employment rate second quarter after exit based on supplemental wages, they're also going to be included in the median earnings rate, and vice versa. So in your system of record, one documentation of a supplemental wage record when needed in their second quarter after exit is going to count for that positive in the second quarter, and then it's going to put them in that list of median earnings wages. And then similarly, if the collection of their employment and wages can't be obtained through a direct wage match, UI wages, or supplemental wage information, then that participant or exiter cannot be included as being in unsubsidized employment for any of the related measures. So just want to point out here, because I know that I used to get confused about this. Unsubsidized employment counts. Supplemental employment is not unsubsidized employment. It's just supplemental employment where we're not getting the wage upload. So then again, and this is very important to remember, and it has to do with career planning, since there might be a participant who chose not to provide their SSN, but there's still a participant in WIOA, we're not going to get their wage matches no matter what. So for those exiters, you need to have their wages recorded as supplemental, even though you know their employer is reporting them to us. We don't have their socials, so those need to be treated just like supplemental and manually recorded, please. And that, just identifying a few of those that maybe you didn't realize that before or weren't tracking them, will increase your performance for this measure, if you hadn't been doing that practice for supplemental, at least recording them. Because again, it's just like all those other post-exit performance outcome and MSG, it's like a manual entry when we talk about supplemental wages. So next slide, please. Thanks. Okay, this is a little cheat sheet, informational slide, sources of supplemental wage information, employment records from federal and state sources, tax documents, payroll records, and employer records when available. Other type of supplemental wage records could include a follow-up survey, documentation of income earned from commission and sales or other similar positions. So detailed case notes that have been verified and signed by the career planner or employer, automated database systems or data matching with other partners, one-stop operator systems, admin records, self-employment financial statements when those are available. So those are just source documentation. You record it in the system, you record the information in the system, and then you document it with these types of information. Next slide, please. Okay, so as far as supplemental wage information goes, when the supplemental wage values don't really represent the entire amount earned by the participant in like a second quarter after exit, there's a wage conversion chart that is used to convert those values for the purpose of that measure. So those wage conversion charts, they've been around forever, and if you want this document or this chart, it's in the Teagle and we can attach it to this policy. But the wage conversion chart is used. The calculation can help you convert hourly, weekly, biweekly, or monthly, or annual wage into quarterly wages for reporting purposes. There, I didn't even look this far, but yeah, it's attachment 3 of Teagle 1016, change 1. So it's been around forever. There's also a chart that would help you determine what someone's quarterly wage or annual wage would be broken down to the hour. So please note, a participant's quarterly wage earnings used for reporting should only reflect those wages that are actually paid to the participant during the quarter. So they shouldn't include wages that are earned in that quarter, but then paid in another quarter. If you have questions about that, we need to make sure it's as accurate as possible. We're on a fair and even playing field for true wages earned in the second quarter. Otherwise, it wouldn't be fair if we threw in a little extra that might have taken place in like their third quarter after exit, because they were reported, the reporting wasn't aligning correctly. It's what were actually paid to them in that quarter. And that's for data validation purposes to be aware of. And once again, we just want to mention that there are times and occurrences that take place and that happen or are the status of participants that will automatically exclude them from being reported in your performance outcomes. So as to say, you're off the hook for their outcomes, but you might lose some positive outcomes too. Just to be aware, these are reported at time of exit, and it's reported in your system of records. Exit reason: incarceration, or if you become a resident of an institution, if you know this and it's documented. Medical treatment that's expected to last longer than 90 days. If a participant is found to be deceased, if they are a member of the National Guard or another reserve military unit, and they're called to active duty for at least 90 days. And then for youth Title 1B only, they have an extra criteria or outcome. And if they are in the foster care system and they exit because of a move from the local area as part of that program or system. And all of these must be backed up and documented in the file. So I think I saw a question scroll through, and I'm just gonna.
Yeah, it was Christine Paula where she asked if someone exits after, or if an exclusion reason occurs after exit during quarter 2 or quarter 4, will this count?
So no. So the only way that we can exclude a participant for one of these reasons after you have exited them is if a participant is deceased. The other outcomes need to be documented at time of exit. So for example, if you exit someone as entered unsubsidized employment, and during follow-up, sadly, you determine that they're deceased in their second quarter after exit, if that's documented after the exit, that will exclude them. But after they're exited as entered employment, if say you realize that they're incarcerated in their third quarter after exit and document, that won't exclude them from performance reporting. And there's a nice attachment that, I mean, this is taken from verbatim. It also outlines it in the TEAGL. And the wording describes it as such.
Okay, we'll go to the next slide here. Getting close to the finishing time. These last few slides are pretty repetitive from what we've shown before, but there are a little bit differences. So we'll go ahead and show you here where under direction from DOL, there are the three measures we're talking about today. 2 of them are being assessed right now or were assessed in the past program year 2020. And the employment fourth quarter is on hold, just like we talked about in the last 2 webinars, credential attainment, measurable skill gains. They're waiting for additional information before they assess states. So we passed that on through that policy that we issued several months ago, the pilot project, to withhold any assessment and any sanctions on these same 3 bottom measures. So just wanted to clarify for you the guidance we've been receiving, and if anything changes, we will make sure we update you on that. Yeah, I apologize. I've got some, this good weather will catch up to you eventually. Paul, I'm going to ask you to read the next scenario because of the noise behind me.
Sure. Okay, so this is repetitive in each WIOA Wednesday webinar. We always provide the last few slides that tell you exactly the training, employment, and guidance letters from where we're deriving all of this information. And so you always have those references, and DOL has a nice website that lists all of these. So we have TEAGL 1016 change 1. It's the good old performance TEAGL. Then we have training and employment guidance letter TEAGL 1418. This provides the exact same information for WIOA Title I programs, as well as it mentions some other partner programs information. Next slide, please. Okay, TEAGL 2616 is guidance specifically on the use of supplemental wage information. 2319 is guidance for validating all of this documentation we're talking about. So it provides a lot of bullet points of source documents. And then we have the training and employment notice, the 2519, that's all about the post-secondary credentials as they relate to the credential attainment measure, and some of the MSGs we document. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have one more employment-related scenario. Mark, I think you probably still have some maintenance going on outside. So I'll go ahead and talk about this scenario. So this is about Darnell, and he's a WIOA Title I adult participant who enrolls in an associate's degree program in computer programming. He completes the program in April of 2020. In a follow-up discussion in November after he exited, Darnell indicated he was self-employed, but it did not indicate the wages he had been earning. Is Darnell included in the median earnings indicator? So I'll wait for you to start the poll. Kirsten?
I already did. People are answering it.
Oh, I missed it, didn't I?
You're okay. We have a couple minutes here. Well, it's been a little over a minute and people are still kind of trickling in answering it. So we'll give them a couple more seconds.
Okay, so whenever you're ready, we'll go to the next slide, please.
I'm sharing the results, Paula, and it looks like we're about half and half between yes, but his wages in the median earnings indicator would be 0 or no. And so half people answered yes and half people answered no.
Okay, I see that now here. I just had it moved to the side. So the answer is yes, Darnell would be included in the median earnings indicator as he was employed, but without indicating earnings, he'd be included with a wage for $1 for the median earnings calculation. And that's because if a participant is employed, that they are included in the median earnings calculation with the wages earned for the second quarter after exit. But when there are no wages available, but it's indicated that the participant is employed, they're just given earnings equal to the $1 for the calculation, and they are added into that range of values that are used to calculate the second quarter earnings and listed for the local area and the state. So if it was indicated he had $0 in earnings during the second quarter after exit, he wouldn't even have been included in the measure and wouldn't even be a success or failure because he wouldn't be included. And this is probably something more that happens behind the scenes in the system for calculation purposes of the median earnings. So I'm looking for questions. And I see that Moore said that his wages are $0, but that is probably having to do with this this nuance in the calculation of medians hasn't been discussed a whole lot. It's in the Teagle, but we've never really brought it up. But thanks, Mark, because it might answer some questions or reporting of this. David Taylor said chainsaw. I was thinking it was a weed whack, but so David Taylor, I also saw your questions about funding work number. So I think some of our local areas could probably answer that right now better than I could. Okay, and so once again, Mark has included a list of all of our performance go-to resources. and they're linked. So if you ever have questions, or when you go to some of these, if any of the information in any of these WIOA Wednesday webinars on these measures makes you think about something else, or you have a question, or you think that our interpretation on one of the slides isn't correct, you can always go to this more in-depth guidance and question us or yourself. So okay, and then there's further additional resources available. We just finished up all our policy for performance accountability. And then, of course, we have all of the webinars up into this one published. And then they're all found in e-policy on Illinois WorkNet under our newly updated Chapter 3, Performance Accountability and Reporting. Okay, and thanks to everyone who's answering David's question. And so what's next in WIOA Performance Technical Assistance? Well, we've made it through this far. So January 19th, looking forward, we are going to prepare a webinar just on youth performance because, like we all know now, there are a bunch of different nuances and ways that youth performance is calculated a little differently. The numerators and denominators are different, even though their measures are all bundled up. We know that there's some little tricks when we're talking about the methodology and the positives for youth. January 26th, we're looking at 1 to 2:30 on program exits. So that's going to be about rules on exiting for all 3 programs. And February 9th, we're looking at 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock with a break, and this will be like a WIOA performance measures, best practices virtual roundtable that Mark is actually working with others, and we'll find out the best mechanism to do this with the rooms and everything. But please make sure you reference this if you're possibly not going to be on vacation and going to be working, so you could be involved with these and attend them. That would be great. And 2022, obviously there's going to be some technical assistance and webinars strictly on career planning, the Title I services matrix that hasn't been released yet, IPATS, the Illinois Performance and Transparency System that we have built in Illinois WorkNet, effectiveness in serving employers, and then local negotiations for PY 22 and 23 is coming up, as well as performance reporting, and then later in the year, the annual statewide performance report. And I think with that said, if there are no further questions, we're about 2 minutes out from the end of this webinar, and I thought that this would be a shorter one. I wouldn't have enough information, so I don't know if I talk too much, but I don't think there's anything simple when it comes to WIOA performance measures. So we're here if you have any questions, and I hope that we answered anything that you did. Okay, well, enjoy the rest of your day and happy holidays and Merry Christmas, Happy New Year if we don't talk to you.
Thank you so much, everyone. I am really quickly, Paula, I apologize, going to put in the chat the survey, the follow-up survey for everyone. If you would like to, if it's timely in your mind to take it right now, we would greatly appreciate it. And if not, then you'll receive that same survey in the follow-up email tomorrow, along with the link for the slide deck and the recording. So be on the lookout for everything tomorrow. And yes, happy holidays to everyone. Stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you.